I'm here with my client, Brandon. He just competed in his very first bodybuilding show, which is super exciting because he's been a fat kid his whole life, according to him. But what's up, Brandon? Tell me a little bit about what did it feel like to finally get on stage?
Yeah, what's up? Thank you for having me on here. Honored. This is my first podcast. How it felt to be on stage. As you can tell during prejudging, I was very nervous. I definitely I was so focused on like my foot placement and like the whole posing, since that was what I had a lot of issues with, that I forgot to smile, and I kind of like look at you and I just see you like,
You
and
with the
I'm like,
Joker face.
I'm like, oh yeah, that's right, I need to smile. And so like I got my pictures taken back, and in the beginning I'm just like straight face for like a few pictures, and then like 3 pictures later, and then I smile, and I just like remember that. But the first time was definitely like nerve-wracking. I think it's just like anytime you're doing something for the first time. And it was just getting the nerves out. And then when I came back on for the second class, it was like, okay, I already went once and got used to it. And then by the time finals came, it was like, all right, I already went up a few times. I kind of got it all out. I saw what everything was, getting used to being under the lights and everything. The biggest difference was just like the crowd. Prejudging, not that much people there. And then like finals, I was like, whoa, taken back by it. Like, yeah. But overall, it was a great experience. I liked it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, one, that's why I told you like doing multiple classes is always better, especially your first time, just because, well, one, like you spend so much time prepping for the show. Like you took a long time to get there, right? Imagine spending all that time and you only got to do it you only got to be up there for 90 seconds and you weren't even smiling for half the time, right? You'd be like, oh man, that wasn't that great. So the first show, the first class is really to like not knock the rust off, but to just get you used to being on a stage, because it's weird the first time.
So like when I was purchasing for the pictures during check-in, the woman was like, "Oh, it's your first time? Okay, just buy the pictures for when you do your first class." And I was like, "Sure." I'm just listening to her, whatever. And after that experience, I'm like, "Dang, I should have paid for her to take pictures on the second class instead," because I felt like that one was better since I was better prepared and got the nerves out. And I was like, "Oh well."
Yeah, I would say the second class is always better because you're a little bit more used to it, especially if you're not someone that grew up being on a stage. Being on the stage is weird. The lights are hot. You think that you could see people, but you can't really see people. You could just see judges, and you're like, oh man, they're just judging me, and it's a weird experience.
Yeah, and I remember trying to like look up other people's advice about it, and then they were kind of like, look over the judge. But when I was on there, I was like, I couldn't. I ended up just staring at the judge.
You just make eye contact.
Yeah.
Okay, so you felt nervous, right? Like obviously I knew that you were going to feel nervous, but like what did it feel like to actually get on stage and reach this goal of yours that you've had for so long?
It was surreal. I think especially the night before, just being by myself at the hotel, and I was just thinking about, I was like, it's finally here. And I think my journey was just a little bit different because we did postpone it twice. And so like first time around, it was like you're excited and you're just kind of running through it, and then we made the decision to push it back, and it made sense too. And then the second time when it got pushed back and we were getting ready for the third date, it was just kind of felt like, is this even going to happen, or is this going to get pushed back again? And it was just kind of like that unknown. And then when it got to like, all right, bought my spot. And then the night before, sitting in the hotel, like with the tan on, it was like, okay, this is really happening. So that's when it really started settling in. And then you started to think about like everything you did leading up to it. It was like, I think my prep was like 8 months. It wasn't entirely the 8 months, but then we had a lot more to get down ahead of time before we can begin prep. And it was just a long period of like, still going out with friends, but having my meals or eating before, not, sacrificing that social life aspect. And just like the long hours in the gym and like sacrificing everything like that, even missing dinners with my like, family and everything. And kind of like them questioning like, oh, what's going on? Like, where's Brandon and stuff like that. So for it to all finally happen, I was like, this is what, I did all the sacrifice for leading up to it.
So you kind of had your moment the night before, not really on stage.
Yeah, definitely the night before, because I was just like in my own thoughts and just like laying there, like obviously brutally tired for sure. And like part of me just like, I just was like having a meltdown over every little thing. I remember you told me like, hey, you might need something. I left that something in my car. And then I was already in my room. I'm like, oh, I gotta go back downstairs and get it. Like I'm having the worst day ever. But it was really something so simple of just like walking downstairs. But it was moments like that where I was like, looking back now, it was like, oh, funny, haha.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, prep is just such like it's a real big roller coaster of emotions. Like you have these days where you're like, dude, I look fucking sick. You're in the gym, you're like, dude, my pump is sick, my arms look great, I'm shredded. And then the next day you're like, oh dude, I look like shit. I'm small, I'm flat, like I'm not really that conditioned. And then it's just a lot of that. And it's funny that even the very last day you experienced that, you had the feeling where you're like, oh wow, I've never looked better than this, but also at the same time you're like, I feel like terrible. Yeah. And then all of a sudden you have this peak where you're like, wow, it's like, it's tomorrow morning. All I have to do is sleep if I can. And then I can wake up and we're going.
Yeah. Even during that week too, like when you mentioned about like, am I conditioned enough? That definitely set in a lot. Cause then it was just like, I think just with the access we have with the internet, social media, like we're looking around everywhere else and you're seeing all these other guys that who knows how long they've been training or anything like that. But then you're seeing them step on stage and they're like, dude, they're freaking crazy. And then you're looking down at yourself like, am I going to be ready? Those situations. But then, the last few days really got me right. And I was like, oh, okay, now I'm ready.
Yeah. Bodybuilding's a tough thing because you have no idea who's going to show up. And there could be someone that has been training for 10 plus years, and you could be in the same class as them just because they never turned pro, like as at the amateurs. That's why the skill level is so varied. But at the end of the day, you kind of have to focus on where did you come from? Like what was your journey? Like how far have you come? Because at the end of the day, bodybuilding is subjective. You can be going against some crazy dude with genetics that looks like a freak and he's about to turn pro in 3 weeks. So comparing yourself to someone that is way further along will kind of make what you've done not feel as meaningful. But on that note, take me back, man. Like, what was it like for you before we started? I know that you told me that you were always a fat kid growing up. These are his words, by the way. I didn't know him back then. So, what was it like for you back then? Why do you think you were a fat kid?
Yeah, I mean, truthfully, I was. I think the doctors tried to cover it up in a nice way. I remember being told, I think it was like in first grade or something. They didn't want to call me obese at the time because I was like 6. So they were like, oh, he's big boned, but he needs to stop eating like fried food and fast food and everything like that. I didn't understand that. And that was just kind of like what my diet consisted of at the time. So then like, even when my mom tried to like sway me that way, but she wasn't doing it herself. So it was just like, no, I want to still eat McDonald's or whatever. And so I always stayed that course. And I had a little bit of somewhat of an athletic background. I love sports. I was always into basketball and football and everything like that. But then I just was big boned.
So were you a picky eater?
No, I wasn't.
Okay, so that's just what your family was eating, and you were just eating a lot of it.
Yeah, and then there was no sense of like diet or anything like that in our household. It was like, as long as he's eating, that's what matters. Because they didn't want to have to deal with like, oh, they're not eating anything we buy them or anything like that. They would rather we have food. And I think that comes from like my parents coming from their country where they didn't have a lot of food all the time. So just eating is a good thing. But it also came contradicting because when you go to family parties, it'd be like, oh, you're so fat, but come here, come eat. And they're like, eat more. And then, but you're like, you just call me fat. And then like, one thing my uncle used to do was like, he used to buy me McDonald's and then he would eat with me and he would grab my cheeks like this and be like, oh, you're so fat. And then like I would get upset and then I would start crying and my mom would be like, why'd you do that? He was like, I like it. But because my uncle was really skinny, he couldn't put on fat to save his life. And so that's why he was like, I like it. It was like a weird thing. But that was like my younger years. I think leading up to before we got coaching, I got into powerlifting. So same thing. I still didn't know what I was doing with food. I thought I was being healthier by eating sweet potato and chicken and all that stuff, but I wasn't sure how much I was eating. And looking back now, I was definitely overeating with those foods and me trying to claim, oh, I'm being healthy. And powerlifting was really what got me into the gym because I found something that I was kind of good at. I was like, oh, I'm pretty strong. But then it was just at a point where I was like, dude, I don't even look like I go to the gym. I'm like still looking fat. And I think we had our first initial call and we talked about it, but at the time it just, financially just, I couldn't afford it at the time, but we just left it off after that. And then I had a life-changing event. Keep it short, but I went to Vegas and dislocated my knee.
It's exactly what you think it is. The first time that we had a call, I didn't know you were so young.
Oh, really?
You were like, because Asians, it's like you're either really old and you look young, or you're young and you have that like maybe you're old kind of face.
Oh, okay.
Plus you had like a WRX. I was like, oh, well, he bought like a cool car. He probably is a little bit older.
Yeah.
But anyways, back to Vegas.
Yeah, so I went to Vegas, dislocated my knee, and then that was when I was starting to progress in the gym. I was happy at where I was. I was pushing good weight. I was consistent, got back into it. And this was post-COVID as well because, COVID, the gyms were shut down. So I was completely just at home eating junk, gaining as much as I could gain. I reached my heaviest at 225 during that time as well.
During COVID?
Mm-hmm. And for 2 weeks, I couldn't get up. I had to get help getting up out of to go use the restroom and everything like that because of the strength and mobility of my leg at the time. And, when I was home alone, I would just sit there watching Kobe Bryant video when he tore his Achilles and how he rehabbed to come back. And I was like, dude, if he came back from a torn Achilles, I can come back from this dislocated knee. And so, that's all I thought about during that time. And I just kind of worked on my mindset. And once I got out of it, I was like, I'm going to make the change. And then that's when ultimately I reached out to you and I was like, hey, I think my financial situation now is a lot better. It's time for me to start. And I had to tell you straight up, I was like, oh yeah, by the way, my knee's messed up. So, you were like, okay, just walk. You were like, just walk. That's what you told me to do. Cause I could still lift, but just not as much. And then
I didn't do legs or anything.
Yeah, I couldn't do legs at all for I think 2 to 3 months, and then started getting back into it. But in the beginning, when we first started, I think I told you during the call too. I was like, I'm not planning to do a show or anything like that. That wasn't on my mind. I was like, I just want to lose some weight and look like I lift and be healthier. That was the first plan. And as we progressed, got some results. Just kind of had the thought, I was like, okay, well, how else can I push myself in what way? And then speaking to you about your experiences of when you competed, and then, I guess the universe started sending me bodybuilders, started meeting people that competed, and they would share their experience. And, the one thing I picked up from everyone was, as much as it seems like it's physical, it was more mental most of the time. And from the outside looking in, it doesn't seem that way. You're looking at their physiques and you're like, nah, that's all physical, especially coming from my background of not truly understanding the fitness side of it. So, I think we spoke more and I decided that it was something I wanted to do because I want to help grow my mindset and my mentality. Because now the physical side was starting to progress. And I was like, oh, well, how do I work on this side? I didn't really know at the time. And I saw that as an option. And that's how we decided on the show.
Yeah, so it was pretty interesting that, I was dying when you told me the story about dislocating your knee. We're not going to get into it here. Comment below if you want to know. I'll tell you in the DMs. But, it was interesting because I think, you touched on the whole Asian paradox of your parents feeding you, and then saying, hey, you're fat. And you're like, okay, but you did this to me, you know? And you're in this kind of cycle of like, all right, well, I'm used to eating a lot because that's just what they make me do. Like culturally, that feels like the right thing to do. But then they turn around and say you're fat. And then it's like they're feeding it, and then they just keep making you feel worse about it. But when you got injured and you're focusing on your mindset, and then we started working together, obviously you were super limited. But right out the gate, I think I remember you lost like 20 pounds, like within 3 months or something. And then all of a sudden you hit a wall. Right. This was planned already. It was your first international trip ever. Yeah. And you went to the Philippines, of all places. Shout out my Filipinos. But I knew that you were going to fall off, and I knew you're going to have a hard time getting back to it, because that's what happens to everybody. Everybody thinks like when you're in the zone at home and you're in your own, I guess, system, or like you have structure to your life, it's very easy to say like, oh, I'm not going to break out of this. But as soon as you leave that, it's hard to bring it back. And you found that again with bodybuilding. Yeah. So coming back from the Philippines, right? Like you went from being all in to being 85% in for like a while. Yeah. What was that like?
It was rough, because then it was just like, you're looking back at what you just did the past few months, and you're like, why was it so much easier then? And then that was like months of it being consistent. And then you come back, and then now it's like you were gone for 2 weeks, and that 2 weeks threw off everything. I think it took me a month and a half or almost 2 months for me to get back on track. It was very like, semi here and there. I think you mentioned it too. I was like, well, when you were out there, it was nice because you didn't have to cook anything. Everything was like, made ready for you and everything like that. And it was that for sure. And then like I guess fitness wasn't as big in other countries, especially like in Philippines. So it wasn't easy to go to the gym. Like only, I think 2 of our hotels had a gym there where we could work out at. And for those ones, we were only there maybe like 1 or 2 nights versus like the rest of the time we were somewhere else. So it was like, you got out of the flow of being consistent with your workout and being consistent with eating and cooking as well. And then just like the order of being able to go buy groceries, not everything at once, but it's like, oh, I only need a few items here and there. Versus like when you come back, it's like, well, I didn't buy anything and I finished everything I had before. So my fridge is completely empty and I got to start like clean state and get everything back. And it just took a long time just to get back into it. And then it was just like, the bodybuilding thing, I think you kind of talked about it, but it felt like it was a lot further out. It wasn't like a goal that you call it, like the rabbit, where it was like something that's motivating you, that's near. Yeah. So I think that's what also took a little bit longer for me to, get back on track for it all.
Yeah. I mean, the thing that people usually get stuck with about going on a trip or being off track for a week or so is that if you just made a lot of progress, it gives you this kind of false sense of confidence. You're like, oh, I just did that. It's so easy. I could just do it again. But then people drag it on. They say, I'll do it again, but, tomorrow or next Monday. And then all of a sudden it's been 6 weeks and you're like, oh my God, I haven't got my shit together. Right. But you still have that false sense of confidence. You're like, oh, I can do it whenever you want. And it's true. But all of a sudden, once you make a lot of progress, you have that idea like, oh, it's easy to make progress. I could just do it later. Yeah. And then all of a sudden you lose that kind of that drive to be on top of everything that you're supposed to be on. So I remember we had a lot of talks about, just connecting back to why it's important for you to do this. Like, why did you even want to do it? Because at the end of the day, if you didn't want to be any more shredded or lean than you were, that's nothing to me. I mean, like, as long as you're happy. But if you're saying, I want to be more, but then you don't put it in, then it's like, we got to reconnect on like why that was. So at some point you got the idea that maybe bodybuilding is the thing that's going to get me on track. Right. Yeah. So it was a long process. And I think you remember as soon as you said, I'm back all in, everything started dropping again. Like you were stagnant for 2, maybe even 2.5, 3 months. And then all of a sudden the week that you were like, okay, I'm back on track, you were like, everything came like just started flowing again.
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
Yeah, I remember that because it was right after my birthday.
Oh yeah, I have the video of you taking a shot on your knee.
Yeah. um, I think that kind of played a role into it too, because then that reminded me of my like past life of where I was at too, of just kind of like, you know, that social life of drinking and just doing whatever. And it kind of brought me back to like, okay, well, it's not where I want to be anymore. I want to grow and get out of it. And so after that, that's when I told you, I was like, all right, I'm all in. It's out of my system. And completely put that behind, and then just told myself it's either now or never. Like, I obviously had a long way to go before stepping on stage. So it's like, if I don't start now and the longer it takes, it's going to be the longer it takes for me to get on stage as well. And I think during that time too, when we first spoke, we were aiming for December. And it was like already June. So it was just like, you're telling him now, but are you going to follow through with it? And then that's when I made the decision, like, okay, it's time.
Yeah, that was a tougher thing because as someone who coaches, you know, I coach a lot of just regular people and a lot of first-time competitors. So you have to kind of balance whether someone can handle being pushed that hard or not. You know, I think you would probably admit that if I had pushed you way harder earlier on, you would have been like, no, this is not for me. But because I let you get so close before pushing, then you're like, well, I have no other option now. Like, I've just got to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely that you know, like I think we both agreed it was a lot better that we pushed it back. But the one thing it did leave me with was what I mentioned earlier was like is this even going to happen at this point when we had to push it back? The second time we pushed it back was for other reasons.
Yeah.
But I just, you know, it was just, I guess it was that kind of felt like it was being dangled in front of me about the show. And then like, you're like about to grab it and it just pulled up. And that's how it felt. But yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the first time that I tried to compete, I think I pulled out of 6 shows.
Oh, wow.
Just like back to back to back to back to back. It was like, you know, life stuff was happening. Like I had promised I would go somewhere and I didn't know they were going to be on the same date. So I had to pull out, and then I went on a cruise and I got even more fat. And then I kept trying to do show after show after show, but like I just wasn't lean enough, and I kept pushing it back until I finally did it, which happens to be, you know, almost 10 years ago now this year.
Wow.
But so I get what it feels like when you're like, dude, I just want to get this done.
Yeah.
But also at the same time, when you're first starting out, you know, doing an hour of cardio seems horrible, especially if you're like, dude, I'm still fat. Like, this is, how long am I going to be doing this?
Yeah.
But once you kind of know that you're so close, it's much easier to just buy in. And that's the kind of the story of the thing that I was talking about on my story with like the rabbit. The rabbit is the thing that the dogs chase in the dog racing thing, right? But the rabbit is always close enough to where the dog thinks that they could get it. They even put a muzzle on the dogs so that they don't bite the rabbit in case they do get it. Because if your goal is so far away, you're not going to be as motivated to push hard for it. It's just out of reach. You're like, this is pointless. But as soon as it's close enough, you're like, okay, I could do it. And in the middle of prep, funny enough, you made it even harder for yourself. I mean, we had some talks about it, but you decided to change careers.
Yeah. Definitely did not see everything coming. I think the first decision was like, all right, I'm going to make this a goal. I'm going to do the show. And then a little bit after, you know, had an opportunity come up to switch careers, leaving the banking industry to going full-time in real estate. And as everyone knows, in real estate, you're not getting a check every single week. You're getting a check when you close a deal. And so having that transition period, you know, when you meet someone that's like considering selling or buying, it's not like going to the Target and just buying something. Like, it is like, oh yeah, I'm thinking about buying, but it's also going to take me X amount of time, which could be 3, 6, a year or more from when you meet them as well. And so it was the pressure of living on my savings to do this bodybuilding show, and also finding out how to make it in this career and survive, because, you know, real estate is one of those industries where it has a high failure rate as well. I think it's like 80 or 90% failure rate, something like that in the business. So I was stressed for sure, watching my savings kind of going down, buying chicken and and beef all the time. But then I think I also realized it ended up saving me money having to be such on a strict diet because when I went to eat after the show, I looked at the bill and I was like, yo,
this shit's expensive.
Yeah. So I think it balanced itself out, but it was just doing something new, brand new at the same time, and knowing I had to push myself very hard in both sides of it to hopefully it works out, because there was no guarantee on both sides of it.
Yeah. So real quick, it's funny because people think that healthy groceries are expensive, but they're not. You're just not used to paying that much upfront for food. But the food that you buy that's, healthy and expensive lasts you way longer. Mm-hmm. People don't realize they're dropping 20, 30, 40 bucks every meal, and they do that 7 times a week. That's way more expensive than buying healthy groceries, and you look and you feel like shit, right? Okay, back to what we were talking about. Had to say that. But yeah, we talked a lot about it. It was like a lot of the unknown, and it is pretty nerve-wracking, mm-hmm. right? Like you're like, I don't know if this is gonna work out. And then I think I remember telling you like, well, what other option do you have? You're already all in, so you have to just do what you got to do. At some point, if you keep doing the things that you're supposed to do, you will eventually be pretty damn good at it, and it will all come to pass. And I'm pretty sure I told you everything is gonna come full circle all at the same time.
Yeah, you definitely did. I was just like, as much as like I'm trying to buy into it, it's just hard. And I think the first time when we postponed the show and we decided we're not doing the December show anymore, that's when I first came to you like, hey, I think I should quit the show and not do it and like figure it out another time, because I'm really stressed out with the whole career situation. And you kind of told me, or were like, well, you're kind of already in the middle of it. Like if you go back now, like you went through all that and have nothing to show for it, versus like if you just keep on going. And you kind of reminded me as well, like you're so close, you're right here. And so I think, being able to talk to you, I was like, all right, you know what, let me just keep pushing. Maybe it was just that one day, because that one day I was ready to throw it all and go have the worst meal of my life. But that also comes from my past of when I was stressed, I would go use food as a comfort. And so I would do that, and then I would just totally just like, all right, I'm gonna just lay in bed and feel like crap the rest of the time. And so that was my habit. And I think that when things got hard, my habit was trying to pull me back to what I knew and what I was used to. And so it was also that moment where I realized I was breaking that habit as long as I didn't go back to it at that time. I guess you could say, like, it's kind of that analogy of like, the devil's creeping on your shoulder telling you like, hey, this is a lot better because it's what you're used to and everything. But, if you turn back, it's the old you and you have to start over and everything. But yeah, I'm glad I was able to push through. I don't view food the same way anymore since that moment. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't need it to be like, okay, to comfort me from my stress or anything like that. I'm finding new ways to deal with the stress now.
Yeah. For the record, I didn't convince him to do the show. I wasn't like pushing him to do the show. I kind of just laid it out, At the time I said, if this is something that is that important to you, you also have to think, when else are you going to do it? Because if you get into real estate and, obviously we're going to expect that you do well, things are never going to slow down. So if this is something that is that important to you and you're this close, it's up to you whether or not you're willing to give it up. Because if it's not that important to you, then obviously go all in on work. That's more important than doing a bodybuilding show. But if it is something that's important to you and it's this bucket list thing that you have, don't quit just because it's hard today, because it will get easier and it will come full circle. And it a lot of time it kind of manifests like that, right? Like you try to fall back into your old habits of what makes you feel better right now, like today, mm-hmm. like taking the easy way out, which is for almost everybody, it's food. Like how can I what's the really good thing that I could eat right now and I'll feel good for 30 minutes and then an hour later I feel like shit.
Yeah.
But you push through, you made it past there, and then what happened, right? Like you had that kind of big moment where everything came all at once.
Yeah.
Pause.
I think obviously like we put in, I was helping a client. We put in an offer in January. It didn't get accepted, and it kind of felt like things were falling back apart again, along with prep, and then we were getting closer to the show. And then as soon as I finally bought my spot for the show, they came back to us and like, hey, the offer fell through. Like, are you guys still willing? And so during that same week, we also opened up escrow for the property. And so it was a cool moment because everything came together. I remember talking to you here in between prejudging and finals, but literally a week after my show, we ended up closing right after. So, you kind of just like, I told you.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like you said, like you had a hard time buying into what I was saying because a lot of time it's because you've never pushed to that point to see what's on the other side instead of just trying to, take the easy way out and help yourself with food or be lazy or say like, oh no, this is not for me. Right.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you push past something that you never done before. And I had faith that it was going to all happen at once. Like I just kind of knew, but that's also because that's just what my life has shown me. Like if you just keep going, eventually you'll be rewarded, but most people quit right before they're about to be rewarded. Like on the other side of a really shitty moment is the highest of highs. And hopefully now you have that sort of faith. So like, I mean, even now, right? Like everyone is a little bit more broke these days, times are tough, inflation, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
So you don't know, especially when you run your own business or you're a real estate agent, right? Like you don't get paid unless you produce.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times that can be scary, but once you kind of have that moment of faith, it's like, okay, it could not work out, but my effort is not going to be the reason that it doesn't work out. And it just hasn't worked out yet. It's still going to come. Yeah,
exactly. And then also too, I think, bodybuilding and fitness taught me a lot of skills that I'm realizing can translate over as well. My biggest example was that, in the beginning, we were going to the gym, not being so aggressive, but following a plan, and I was getting results, but it wasn't breaking through. And it wasn't until we got to the point of like leading for prep where I was able to break through. And so I compared it to my real estate side, and it was like, in the past 6 months before that closing, it was like I was doing what I was supposed to, and I was getting some results, but then there was a little bit more effort and energy that I could give, like how I did for the bodybuilding show for the prep, that will help me break through. So then now I'm taking that energy and effort that I had for prep, and I'm moving it over to the real estate side, and I'm creating a system now to help me break through, because I'm like, okay, if I want to have success in here, I'm going to have to do a lot more than what I was doing before. And I'm kind of just seeing the similarities, and there's just like, even though it's two totally different things, what you put into it is the same.
Yeah. I think that is one of the best things that you can get out of fitness or bodybuilding, right? Like it seems like totally different things, but at the end of the day, it's very general skills, right? Like knowing that if I do X, Y, and Z, and I put this much effort in, I'm going to get something out of it. And so it translates like, if I go to the gym and I do my cardio and I eat my food, I'm going to get this result. Yeah. And I just have to be diligent about doing those things every day. Yeah. And then same thing with real estate. I remember we talked about it, and you were like, dude, cold calling sucks, right? Like, and I'm not going to lie, bro, I would never do cold calling. But at the end of the day, it's like, all right, I know that if I do this amount and this, and I'm focused on improving those things and doing them every day, like, you cold call 1 million people, bro, like by the millionth person, you're probably going to be pretty good at just sniffing things out, and being able to lead a conversation. And it's like the same thing, right? Like you're never going to be good in the beginning, but if you have these lists of things that you have to do every day and you knock them out, it's kind of impossible for you to not get better at it unless you're a complete idiot, which, I mean, hopefully you're not.
Yeah. And I think maybe it's bodybuilding definitely gave me confidence once I saw my body change, and maybe it's my ego speaking, but I'm just like, oh, if I can change my body, I could do anything. Yeah. And so I'm not going to speak too much, but then I had an appointment on like a multi-million-dollar home, and I'm going in there like, oh, I'm the one for this. Like, there's no way, because I just changed my body. Like, I can do anything. Yeah. And a little bit of ego, a little bit of confidence, but I think this kind of like, if you can mix the two properly, it could benefit you.
Yeah. So I mean, at the end of the day, like not only do you look better, you have more confidence. It's helped you cultivate new skills, and it's gonna help you make more money just because you're better at doing all this.
Yeah, for sure. And I didn't realize how relatable it was for other people too. People would message me through social media, and they would just like, bring it back up to me like, hey, like, just remember, you did this, which is harder than what you're actually doing for work. And I didn't see it that way. I think because it's been something I've been doing for so long, but then just kind of like taking a step back and remembering when it was hard to just go to the gym. Like one of the techniques I used to do was just like, oh, dang, I really don't want to go to the gym, but let me just drive to the parking lot. Once I drove to the parking lot, I was like, all right, I'm going to walk in now. But it was just like having that moment of remembering that there are still people going through that in their life, and just applying it to what I'm currently dealing with now, which is on the real estate side of it.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. So last two questions, right?
All right.
What do you think has been your biggest win for reaching these goals of getting on stage and being shredded? Like, what's the biggest win that you think you've gotten out of it?
Biggest win. I think like my confidence. That was something that I thought I had before, but I think before it was like a false confidence, and it was just me claiming I had it, but in reality, I didn't truly believe it. And it wasn't until I actually did the work and accomplished the goal where I really built it. And I think the difference is now, before I used to have to go around saying I'm confident, versus now I can just walk with it and not have to say it but just know it deep down inside I have it. So I think that was like the biggest difference or biggest win for me.
Yeah, it's interesting because confidence is definitely not something that you could fake it until you make it. Confidence comes from being who you say you are. Because at the end of the day, if you are who you say you are and you know that.
This is high temp.
Wow, video camera turned off. Anyways.
Is it still recording though?
Yeah, this is recording.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so if you are who you say you are, then you will. Damn, that was a good moment too. If you are who you say you are, then you will be confident, right? Because it's no question. Someone can't come around and say, no, that's not you. It's like, no, that is me. You just, it is what it is, right? Like,
yeah.
If someone says, you're 6 feet tall and you're not 6 feet tall, they're like, well, I'm just not. It's not me.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Okay. And so what was something that maybe you were skeptical about or made you be on the fence about joining the program?
You're talking about like initially coaching with you?
Yeah.
I think for me, it was more of just the financial side that was just difficult. I saw your portfolio, and I think we connected pretty well. So like, I never questioned your ability to get me to where I needed to be. So it was the financial side, and I think I questioned a little bit at the time me following what you tell me to do, because you can create the most perfect plan for me, but at the end of the day, it's up to me to move forward with it. And at the time, I just kind of, like I said, I didn't have that confidence where I was just like, okay, I know if I follow everything he tells me, it'll work. It was more of like second guessing it, because I was second guessing if I would be able to follow it to it perfectly. And I think that was the only hesitations I had for initially joining.
Okay. Obviously we got you past that.
Yeah.
Okay. So what would you tell somebody who's on the fence or skeptical about joining the program?
I would have them ask themselves, like, how important is this to you, and how much would this change your life? Because I also saw it from a business standpoint too, where I felt, I didn't feel it. I was like learning. I was listening to other podcasts, and when you listen to a lot of successful people talk, they kind of all have similar traits. And one of the things they talk about was just like working out and being fit. And so they were talking about how, if you can just get this area right for your body, you'd feel better. And then you'll also do better in your business because of how you feel. And so I took that as an initial step too. I was like, all right, if I can build a consistency and follow these things for my body, then I can translate it over to the business. But that was just the initial part. It took some time to come together and everything. But yeah.
All right. So if someone's skeptical, you tell them, ask themselves how important it is to you, and how much would this change your life?
Yeah.
Okay, that's fair. At the end of the day, I think everybody gets worried about like the financials and, like how much does this like quote unquote cost? But at the end of the day, I think you're a great testament to it's not a cost if you are getting an extreme amount of value, right? Like you being in shape, obviously you're in shape and you're healthy, but it's helped you become more confident, which helped you switch careers and then give you the skills to be better at doing that job so far and help you push through and have more grit. And so it also helps you make more money, live longer, right? So like it's like, a one-time investment for something that can completely change your life.
Yeah. And I think there's no price that you can put on your health. There was something I heard and it was just like any billionaire would give up all their money for longer life if they could. And so the saying, like, if you're currently fat like I was, maybe I only lived till about 50, but because I was able to get in shape and follow it, even though it seemed like a lot of money during the time, but now I get to live till 70. It's like, don't you feel like that's worth the payment you made anyways?
Yeah.
And I think it's absolutely worth it. Maybe someone like young like me, it's a little bit harder to see because there's no like kids or grandkids, but I'm sure someone a little bit older where they have kids playing, they can definitely relate to that for sure.
Yeah, the last thing I'll say is just I saw this on like Instagram or something like that, and this guy goes, if I offered you $10 million today, would you take it? Would you?
Yeah.
Right. But what if I said the $10 million means you don't wake up tomorrow?
No, not at all.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so that's basically saying you think waking up tomorrow is more important than $10 million. So, your health is everything.
Exactly.
It's more important than money. Like obviously money's important. Don't go broke for this. Right?
Of course.
but like you got to pay your bills.
Yeah.
But, if you're just seeing this as like, oh, I'm losing out on a little bit of money right now, as opposed to like, oh, I'm going to wake up more days, or I'm going to wake up happy more days. I'm going to, enjoy being me and like being who I want to be. Like, it's more important. But anyways, thanks for coming on the show, man. I appreciate you coming on. I'm glad you had this awesome transformation. I'll put it up on the screen because right now the camera turned off and overheated. But check out Brandon. If you are in the Long Beach area, where can they find you if they want to buy a house?
They can hit me up on Instagram. I'm sure you'll add it somewhere on here, but it's THEE_BLEE. And they can just send me a message and we can have a conversation.
Yeah. So if you felt like you got value from this episode, let me know. Give the show 5 stars. If you give it anything else, I'll come punch you in the face. But like the show, I think it helps. Give it a review. If you're on YouTube, subscribe. And if you would like to work with me or follow me on Instagram or follow Brandon on Instagram, I'll leave all those things in the link below. But we'll see you next time.